In this video, I'm going to walk you through the start to finish process that I used for creating this pendant. For this project, I've selected a 12 by 16 millimeter stone, 4 pieces of 21 gauge square in 5-inch segments, and 2 feet of 22 gauge half round. I'm going to start by taking my half round, pinching the two ends even together, and sliding my fingers down till I find the center of the half round. Next, I can take all 4 squares and I can align them so that they'll sit evenly by making sure they're even at one end and pinching and sliding my fingers down. When I get to the other side, I can slide back the other way. Putting a slight bend into the wire will ensure that these squares will sit nice and evenly inside the coil we create. To start coiling these together, I'm going to take our half round with the loop that we've created, and in the approximate center of our 4 square wires, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it twice in either direction. Next, I can take my pliers and flatten the half round down onto the squares. That ensures that the squares will sit nice and flat inside this coil. The coil that we're creating will actually sit at the very bottom of the piece. So in order to make sure that I have equal working distance with my squares on either side, I can use a ruler and slide it to place, making sure that I have it in the dead center of my squares. Once you've made any adjustments necessary, I'm going to go ahead and wrap one more time around either direction with the squares and flatten with my pliers. At this point, with the flat side of my half round facing up, I should have 5 rotations of half round around all the squares and 6 rotations on the outside. Next, I'm going to take the topmost square, bend it 90 degrees straight up. This will actually begin to create the back of the setting for the stone. Once I have both wires bent up, I can go ahead and wrap twice with my half round. Next, I'm going to take the 2 squares closest to me and bend those 90 degrees up as well. If we rotate it onto its side, you can begin to see where our stone will sit in between the 2 sections of square. Before moving forward, we're going to take the next closest square to me and bend it 90 degrees straight down on both sides. From here, I can go ahead and add 5 coils around both sides of the single square that's still facing towards the sides. If we slide the stone down into that pocket, we can begin to form the wires around the edges of the stone. We're going to go ahead and reconnect the wires holding the stone at the back of the setting. To do so, I'm going to pinch with my pliers and just kink it directly out to either side. From there, we can go ahead and add one more kink, bringing the square wire back parallel to our wire that has the half round curved around it. From here, I'm going to reconnect that back square into the coil with the half round 3 times, bringing those squares flush next to each other. Holding my stone in place, I'm going to take each of my front wires straight out to the sides, bring them around in a nice even spiral that will cover just the bottom of the stone. Once I have those spirals on both sides, I'm going to put a kink into the square so that it can rejoin the bundle on either side in a nice straight angle. I'm going to go ahead and wrap twice around that. Our stone should sit nicely in that little pocket, with the curls from these square wires on the front holding it in the front, and the kinks from the squares in the back holding it at the back of the piece. I'm going to go ahead and create the top half of the back of the setting by taking my square at the back and bending it in towards the center. On both sides, I'm going to go ahead and put another kink into that square wire on the back so I can begin to create the setting for the top of the back. It's time to add a little bit more detailing for the bottom. I went ahead and cut 12 inches of 28 gauge round that I'm going to pinch the endings together with and slide down till I find the center of the wire. Taking our two square wires from the bottom, I'm going to bring them around the curl that we've already established on both sides, tracing along that same line. I can take the loop of our 28 gauge and slide it over both wires, wrapping it once around each side to begin creating a weave between these two wires. The pattern for this weave is quite simple. Starting on the left, I'm going to take it over the top of the leftmost square, underneath the right square, slide it all the way down so that it's just on top of the 28 gauge on the right wire, wrap it once around my rightmost wire, and then switch to the lower 28, which I'll bring across the front over the top of the right wire, underneath the left square, around the left square once, over the top of the left square, and underneath the right square. Bring it around one time, and repeat the same pattern, switching to the lower square. Coming across, wrapping around, and switching back over. I went ahead and repeated the crossover 3 times. I'm going to take the remaining amount of my 28 gauge and coil it around the square individually, just adding some interesting texture to that element at the bottom. For the desired length of this coil, I rotated 20 full times around the square, and then I'm going to cut my 28 gauge short and tuck the wire ending in towards the center of the piece. From here I can go ahead and kink the wire so that it'll reconnect into my bundle of squares nice and evenly. Taking the 3 squares that are still part of that bundle, separating the back square, I'm going to wrap 3 times. Once I have that coil secure, I can go ahead and repeat the same process on the other side. Once I've completed that coil, I can go ahead and make sure that it is going to sit parallel to my other two squares. And I can go ahead and wrap those 3 times together. Sliding our stone down into place, it should look something like this. From here, I can go ahead and kink my topmost square wire facing towards me to begin creating the top setting on the front. To make things a little bit easier, I'm going to go ahead and slide the stone out of place so I can reach my 2 center squares on both sides that I can wrap around 5 times. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that same process on the other side. If we slide the stone back into place, it should look something like this. Taking our coiled squares, I'm going to pick the wire that's closest to me, kink it directly out to either side. From here, I can go ahead and reconnect the wires at the back of my setting into the bundle of squares. I'm going to slide my stone out of place just to make it a little bit easier to access those squares. I can go ahead and take my pliers and bend so that my squares can reconnect back into that bundle. I'm going to go ahead and wrap twice around each side just to secure them into place. If I slide my stone back into place, it should sit approximately like this. Slide my stone back out and wrap 3 more times around each side of the squares for a total of 5 rotations. At this point, with 5 rotations around each set of the squares, I'm going to take my left square, I'm going to cut the half round short and pinch it so that the wire ending is in towards the center of the piece. I'm then going to bend 90 degrees into both squares just after where the half round ends, and do the same on the other side, leaving this half round in place. Next, I'm going to pinch my 2 bundles of squares together, which will close the stone into the setting. Taking my remaining half round, I can wrap all 4 squares together twice. I want to pinch it flat from both directions to ensure that my squares sit nice and evenly inside that bunch. Bringing my half round along the side of the bunch of squares, I can go ahead, pinch it flush to the squares. From here, I'm going to bend 90 degrees into the square closest to the back. I'm then going to bring it down to where I can feed it through the back of our setting, creating loops where our bail will connect to on the front. Very gently, I'm going to feed that square wire into the kink that creates the back of the setting. I want the flat side of the wire to run along the stone, being very careful not to scratch the stone with the corner of the wire. I want to make sure that the wire ending is tucked in towards the center so it won't create a snag on the wearer. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same process on the other side, gently feeding the wire between the stone and the setting, pulling it to the same tension. For the other two square wires from the back, I'm just going to go ahead and bend them around and secure them just above where our half-round coil is, pinching the wire endings in towards the center of the piece. Now free to go ahead and work on the bail. Similar to what we did at the bottom, I went ahead and cut 2 feet of 28 gauge round. I'm going to pinch those wire endings together and slide my fingers down to find the center of the wire. With my piece, I'm going to take the 2 squares that I bent 90 degrees out to either side and just finish that rotation, bringing them in a spiral that feeds up into the bail. From here, I'm going to take the loop of my 28 gauge round, sliding it over just the center 2 squares, down to about just above the point where you can see through to the back over the top of the stone, and spiral 1 time around each square. I'm going to repeat the same pattern as last time, going over the top of the left with my left hand 28 gauge, bringing it over to the right, spiral it once around the right, and then switch to the lower, bringing my right 28 over the top of the right square, underneath the left square, and once around the left. I'm going to repeat that same process one more time, bringing that 28 down into the center and up, around the right, before switching to my lower 28, bringing it over the top of the right, down into the center, and around my left hand square. From here, I'm going to adjust the weave to include my outermost square wires so that they'll be secured into place in the piece. I'm going to start by taking the left wire again, feeding it down into the center, between the 2 centermost squares, and then up in between my center right and around the far right. From there, I'm going to switch to my center right 28 gauge, feeding it down into the center of the weave, up in between the left center and leftmost square, and then around the leftmost square, over the top of my center left, underneath my center right, and then around my rightmost square. I'm going to repeat with the lower wire going in between the far right and the center right, over the top and down into the center of the weave, and then back between center left and far left, once around, and then over the top of my center left, back up in between the center right and the far right. Now before I go back around the outermost, I'm going to switch to our lower square, or our lower round, excuse me, bringing it back into the weave, and now switching back to only weaving between my two centermost. So that pattern just goes back to wrapping once around the left, going down directly in the center, once around the right, and then switching to the lower wire to repeat the pattern. Going down in between them, around the leftmost, back down to the center, and once around the right. Switching to the lower 28, down into the center of the weave, around the leftmost, back down into the center of the weave, around the right. I'm going to repeat that same pattern for the full length of my bail. Every time that I get back to the rightmost square, I switch to the lower of the two 28 gauges. That way I'm bringing both 28s through the weave and still have working wire on both sides of the design. Once I've reached the desired length for my bail, I can go ahead and connect these square wires together, coiling them with our 28 gauge round. Once I've reconnected those wires 5 times, I can go ahead, coil around just the centermost on each side. I can then trim the ending short and flatten it into place. From here I'm going to bend the whole structure over to begin to create the bail. My exposed square wires on the outside of the weave will be the actual contact point for the chain. That way any friction of the chain passing through the bail while it's being worn won't damage my weave. It'll be protected by this nice thicker square wire. To secure those wires into place, I'm going to go ahead and trim them a little bit shorter just to make them easier to work with as I feed them through the loop that we created on either side for securing the bail. I'm going to pull them gently through till I reach the tension that I'm looking for. Then I can trim them short and pinch them down on top of that square. I can then repeat the same process on the other side. And here we have the finished piece. A special thank you goes out to all the names on your screen for supporting this channel through Patreon. What I'm doing would not be possible without your support. If you're interested in helping support the channel, follow the link in the description below this video. If you found this video helpful, leave me a like on the video. This helps me out a lot with the visibility of my videos in YouTube's algorithms. To be the first to know when I upload new content, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and hit the bell to be notified when new videos are available. Thank you for watching, and happy wrapping.